everyone. I'm part of the Spike team that organizes this event for almost 1 year now. Just to kind of, before I start this event, there's a couple of things that I want to start kind of addressing, especially with regards to the first Spike Candy event that we did around 2 weeks back. It was the first time that we were in Candy, and then we had about 60 people showing up, which is great for a first time event. And especially Candy being a city that closes down by like 7-8 p.m. There were people there till like 11 a.m. with us, hugging each other and networking with each other, which is a great thing to see. In terms of the Candy ecosystem, we didn't even expect that there were a community role with a patron who showed up and then have kind of an event. Likewise, there are like a lot of different new things happening in Candy that we didn't expect, which also is a motivation for us to continue the Candy event which we've been doing. And surprisingly, some of the people from Kalam even visited Candy just for the Candy event as well, which is crazy to see. So, I mean, likewise, the Candy event was a success, so we hope to continue. And do share the word about the Candy event. If you have friends, family in Candy, do let them know. We'll be doing it probably around every 2 months. So if there's anyone around, to invite them, and then that will be great. With that, I think I'll start with kind of thanking our main sponsor for the night. We have Huawei Sri Lanka kind of helping us, or joining on board as the main sponsor. And I think around 1-2 events back, I mentioned about the partnership that Spike has with Huawei Sri Lanka. We are kind of partnering up to help our startups in our ecosystem. It can be you're building a digital product, you're providing cloud services, it can be a service agency as well, who are utilizing various cloud services, can partner up with Huawei Sri Lanka, and they are ready to help you both from the technical standpoint as well as growth standpoint. So from the Huawei team, we have Amma joining in today. So if you want to connect with Huawei Sri Lanka to kind of grow your kind of business with regards to anything to do with the cloud services, you can talk with her. With that, I'll also just a small request that I want to make. As we are growing, we also want to spread the word about Spike. So if you guys are taking any pictures, any videos of the night, do tag us on at Spike community so that we can show, in terms of like what the community is like. And also another small request is, if you guys are posting about us on LinkedIn, do feel free to share about like 3 things as takeaways that we're able to kind of learn from the session, so that it can help kind of the community to understand what's the value that they're providing to the ecosystem as well. And in terms of today's event, it will be in a different format. I think earlier we were going to do we individually have our speakers in the session, but we want to test some new things this time. So the format will be a little bit different. One of the first things will be starting off with a panel discussion first. So our speakers will kind of first of all start off with a panel discussion. And then we usually, as usual, we go towards the Q&A where you guys can ask your questions and communicate with the other speakers. And thirdly, something interesting that we want to do. In the Candy event, if I recall, something that happened was that this was not planned at all. We just asked, I think, Charlie from our team asked someone to just pitch your startup. He was just starting his company as well, so he's quite new to the scene. So when he was going to explain what he was doing, pitch himself, elevator pitch, he couldn't exactly explain in an effective wordings in terms of what he does. He didn't have a proper elevator pitch ready. So then at that time we were able to kind of help him figure out what his elevator pitch should be. And we were able to criticize and kind of help him realize what his actual USP, what his real value in terms of what he does is. So we want to try that out as a session in the Colombo event. So what we're going to do is, as we conclude our Q&A, we want to give 3 startups to come here and pitch what they do. Basically, elevator pitch. We have one startup already who has shown interest. So when that session comes, 2 other startups can raise their hand and show their interest, and they can come here and then pitch what they do. And then from someone from the community audience, even us from the Spike team, we just ask questions and maybe criticize your pitch. so that you can think about it in a different angle, different perspective, and of course you can improve it, which is going to be helpful for you at the end of the day. So that is a really interesting segment that we want to bring in. Yeah, I think with that, I think we are ready to kind of kick off the session. So before we start off, I will kind of use Sachin the kind of opportunity to kind of introduce the amazing speakers that we have for the night. So with that, we will start off getting up product adaptation and fundraising tactics. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, everyone. So, guys, thank you all for coming today. And just before we move into the speaker introduction, I thought it would be the best to get to know you all. So, can I have a show of hands to see who's at Spike for the first time today? I already spoke to a few people who are here for the first time. Okay. And who has their startup already? Alright, okay. Any Web3 startups in particular? Nice. I see hands. Good. And anyone who wants to start a Web3 startup? Okay. Right. I think people are still shy to engage. That's fine. I think by the end, once you have that couple of years, you will be raising both of your hands. Right. So yeah. So without further ado, let me introduce Leeroy. So Leeroy is the co-founder of Appium. Appium is a venture studio that focuses in Web3 as well. And he's a serial entrepreneur for more than 25 years. So 25 years, the sound of luck, guys. Anyone who's older than 25 years here? Okay, yeah, you and I am older than 25 years here. So, Nivan, are you? Nivan isn't. Okay. So he's originally from Netherlands. Thank you, Leeroy, for coming here to tell us about all of that. I will have the thanks later, but yeah, please do come here. Joyce is a portfolio director for Animonca Brands, and that has more than 500 plus Web3 startups in their portfolio. They help these startups grow and thrive. So please do come. Let's get the session going.
I handed it over to Nevan and Sachin and the team, but good to be back here. Leeroy and Joyce, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. I met Leeroy and Joyce about a month ago, I think, at Connect. Thanks to Nissanka from Appium. I've known Nissanka through JKX Accelerator, and then I think Nissanka messaged me about maybe about 3 months before you came to Sri Lanka, messaged me and said, hey, Joyce is coming from Animonca Brands, she's from Sri Lanka, you should have a chat. So then I met them at Connect, and then we started talking for like 15 minutes, and then I was like, man, I need to get this guy to come and talk here. Right? So then I ran the idea by them, and they were like, yeah, let's do it. And Lee was like, yeah, give me a topic, I can talk about anything. Right? And then Joyce, she mentioned that she has like 500 startups under her portfolio with Animonca. By the way, Animonca is a $6 billion company as of now. About $6 billion company. This is one of the biggest brands in Web3. So I was like, yeah, so let's get them to come and have a chat. And then also we wanted to sort of change the format. Actually, Joyce suggested that, hey, can we do this as a panel discussion? So we thought, with Spike, we don't have a lot of formalities. We try to keep things very informal and casual. I think that's worked really well for us in the past. So I thought, why not, let's try this out and then see how that goes. So I have a bunch of questions for you. So the format is going to be like 15-20 minutes. I'm going to throw some questions at them. Hopefully that's going to be some thought-provoking questions for you too. And then after that, we will open the Q&A for the audience, right? And then there'll be a mic running around, and then and you can ask your questions, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. But before like Devan said, feel free to tag us and then post it on social media as well. Cool. So I have my first question for Lee, right? So I think the previous month, not the last month, the month before that, we were talking about growing business out of Sri Lanka, and that had a lot of positive response. And then, and I think the speakers were talking about what are the avenues, what are the paths that you can take. But if you are building a product company, how do you adapt to that? How do you adapt your product to go out of the country? right? So on that note, how do you determine whether a product needs to be adapted or if that can be marketed globally as it is?
It's a hard question to answer, obviously. I don't think there's a clear answer based on like the type of product that you're building. If it works in a specific market, it might not work anywhere else, right? There's also local factors to consider. If you look at, for example, Uber. Uber started in the US, worked great. You know, like they had the market segment in San Francisco, and then they branched out to all the different cities in the US. Because they were one of the first ride-sharing apps out there, they conquered all the market share and therefore conquered the local market because of that. But then you saw companies like local companies like Picnic, like Grab, like Gojek popping up in specific markets that just like offered more for the user in a streamlined format. And because a lot of these markets have, let's call it lower margins, Uber could just not compete within these markets themselves. So there's not a clear answer to like, hey, this works in one market, how do I make it work in another? Like, even like the example between Uber and Gojek, for example, Gojek has probably 120% features within their app themselves, right? Uber has 7 or 8 that they're doing globally, right? Especially in the early stages. So one of the things that you can do to like make your product more applicable for specific markets is saying, hey, I know this market, I know the cultural values of that market. What features can I add to my product that make it more attractive than whatever competition I have or whatever the local people in a specific market would enjoy doing with my product?
I think, Uber is a really good example because I think when they started in Sri Lanka, something that they started doing was even before you start the ride, the moment that you book the ride, they do a pre-authorization on your card, which I don't think they did in other countries, right? Because they wanted to see, I don't know, I think you guys can tell me as well, right? Because I think there are a lot of cases of people booking the ride and then they didn't have money in the card to pay for it. So how they adapted to that was they did a pre-authorization on the card to see if there's enough any money, and then if there is money for the ride, then they will allow you to book the cab. So I guess that's how they localized the product when they came to Sri Lanka. So when you're expanding globally, if you're thinking about like geographically, right? Can you suggest like how do you prioritize which market to enter? Like any metrics or any ways to look at that?
I mean, I had an investor once ask me 20 years ago when I was trying to do fundraising in the Netherlands, like, oh, this is such a great idea. Let's do it for the Dutch market. I'm like, no, I'm building a tech product. It's inherently global, right? Like you don't build for a local market specifically unless you see a market share that you can capture and revenue that you can generate with that can sustain your business and grow your business, right? If you're building a tech product to begin, that is by inherently the definition of itself is a global product, right? You have a small team when you're starting, you don't have time to localize, you don't have time to do any of this, right? So unless you already have an existing product or an existing idea within a specific market that you can capitalize on, you build globally. That's just what you do. And then you see where you get that traction through the metrics, right? Like which country do we have the most users from the world? What do these users do with our product? And how can we adopt that and like drive that user growth in those specific markets? And then you start localizing, right? If you already have an existing product, that's a slightly different proposition, but then you think more on features within product. Because you're going to have to build new products for every market if you want to enjoy that.
Right. I mean, when I look at the Sri Lankan market, I feel a lot of companies over here are building for the local market and then thinking about going global. How can do you think about going global from day one, or do you first address the local market needs and then you go into global? I'm sure there's no right or wrong answer for this, but I'd like to know your opinion on that.
I think it's a lot of experience. If you're a first-time founder building a product for the first time, build what you know. Build for the people that you know, right? If you have a community in Sri Lanka and you're building a product for Sri Lanka, yes, build your product, send it to those people and see what they say, right? Like see if they love your product, right? But in my opinion, the better approach to take would be to build for global from the start. And it can be harder to achieve. Well, it is definitely harder to achieve. Specifically, if you're talking about customer acquisition and these type of things. Like, how are you going to get users in those markets? I had a game that I developed over 20 years ago that ultimately went global. I had over 3 million users globally playing this game, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just built a game, and people started playing this game. Right? So in a lot of these cases, you don't even know where it's coming from. I had a bunch of internet cafes in Thailand installed the game on their internet cafe PCs, and they started playing it. And all of a sudden, I had 9,000 users from like I doubled my user base, and 9,000 of these people were coming from Thailand. I'm like, I have no idea how this happened. But someone found it somehow, and all of a sudden, it started happening. So you can be very surprised at where user growth will come from with new one of these new products, and there's almost no way to predict what will happen with that.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I think there is another angle also to actually understand what drives the business value, what is the business revenue coming from. I think in a lot of the cases where if you are looking to build a mobile game, you want to find people who have a very high mobile penetration rate. If you're looking for people who buy console games, for example, then you want to find people or countries who already have that penetration. And so I think there is a lot around building global, but then as you technically choose based on the product you already have, then I think there's still some trade-off in the margin you want to make about where to spend your time and your team's time. Because otherwise you'll be also fighting more of an uphill battle, which for a startup with limited time, limited runway, that's probably not the best way to approach it.
All right. I have a question for you, Joyce, more on the VC landscape. I'm sure we've asked this question from many other speakers or investors who've been on this platform, but at which stage, in your opinion, you've worked with a lot of global companies, which stage should startup consider seeking venture capital, and how can they best prepare for it in your opinion?
I think there is a part about what exactly is the product stage. Because there are many people who want to do a startup and they have a brilliant idea. But the brilliant idea itself doesn't translate into a product, an MVP, or anything that people can say, I can start accruing users for. And that's where I think a lot of the times when you pitch to investors, I'll talk about exceptions later, but when you pitch to investors with only an idea, it becomes very hard for them to actually say yes to it. For sure, they might in your pitch deck or says this is a big market. I've done research around this. There is certain user needs that needs to be fulfilled. I have researched about this. But if there is absolutely zero traction right now because that product has not been built, even in the very minimum format, it becomes a little bit harder for people to visualize and say, do I actually believe in this product? And more importantly, do I really believe in this team's ability to execute? Because startup, a lot of times, many people have brilliant ideas, but it is oftentimes the execution that really distinguishes one versus the rest of the pack. So I think anything that you can do to show the execution will actually help provide a much better stance for you when you come to talk with the investors. And who doesn't love metrics, right? We are all doing technology stuff. It's all about metrics. I think there is, that would be that part where I think is the good time. The second part, I think, is also about why you want to have that traction is because of valuation. When you speak with an investor, you want to, of course, raise that money, but you also want to raise that money in a good valuation, meaning you're not selling half of your company away from day one. But in order to do that, you need to actually be able to demonstrate all of the traction you have. And then using, some people would say, well, I don't have money to start with, how am I even start to build that part, right? I think that link is where we see a lot of people start approaching investors, firstly from their friends and family, which is what most people call literally the friends and family round. You go talk to the people that you know, maybe classmates that you know, professors that you know, and then they kind of start coming into play. And then the second part, you go to angel investors, who are people who might have already been writing checks to smaller startups, very early stage startups, and they might have their own industry expertise that can help you provide resources or connection. I think once you have those people to fund that initial fuel of the expansion, it will actually put you in a much better place when you talk to VCs instead of going direct to VC without that product, the traction, and also that advisors to really be the bench to support you.
I think I saw yesterday on LinkedIn, Anderson Horowitz raised $1 billion for this AI startup. no product built, no single line of piece of code written. Founder's name was Ilya or something, and yeah, they had just
One of the open co-founders. But
Yes.
he's one of the co-founders of API.
Oh yes, correct. Yeah, there you go, I guess.
I think we can maybe then address that exception, right? So some people would then say, the exception here are if you are a proven repeated founder. I think in that case, because of that credential you have, and that credential is not because you founded a startup, it's because you exited a startup at a very good valuation. That's what creates the confidence to the investor. Because to them, you have already proven your ability to execute. Maybe not on this idea, but on all the past ideas that you have done. And you also have proven that you think about your investors. Because look at that valuation, the investors are making a returns from it. So they kind of have that will say they will have a lower bar when it comes to what they need to see in this product if you already have that track record to back it up too.
I think I can't remember. Was it you who you mentioned that there was a founder that who raised some funds in the first round, and then he had absolutely no failure, right, in his first startup, and then he exited from that, and then he did a second startup, and a third startup, and a fourth startup. All of them failed, right? But raising funds for the second, then the third, and the fourth startup was so much easier because he had delivered on the first one, even though the product failed. So I guess it's all down to the credibility of the founder and the execution. On the same note, can you mention some of the red flags that you would see if you're trying to raise funds from a VC?
I'll start first. We'll wait for you to get out to the many red flags you have seen. Okay? I think there are ultimately come back to what investors care about. Investors care about making a return on their investment. So some of the red flags they typically would want to say no to is then, well, let's start off with you don't really know what is driving the business to make profits. And if it is a case of course, it's more users, more revenue, and then supposedly more profits. But then I think usually people want to dig a little bit deeper to just understand, so what exactly is driving the user behavior that will give you a profit? Especially in the startup ecosystem, many startups would think, well, I got all these millions of dollars in venture capital. Now let me just spend it and acquire users. But ultimately those users, they might not stay, or they might not actually even you don't have a revenue stream to actually get that money out of the user to pay for the cost to acquire them. So in that case, the equity they hold, the investors hold, would never make money. And that's why, unless they find a second person that will want to buy it off them in the secondary market, which is possible, it also depends on the opportunity. But coming back to the point, right, they want to know that you know your business well. It comes through from a few different buckets. One is the market. You know the market well, you know your competition well, and you know what drives actual profit for your company as well. And so I think that's the first thing. If you don't, then there's a lot more question around. So how do you actually make money? And the second part I think is about what is that plan of actually getting exit? A lot of times when we start something, we don't want to think about I'm just going to walk away from this thing. But for the investor, if you don't walk away from that thing in one day, how are they going to actually sell their equity to someone else? And that exit might come in the form of IPO, this exit might come in the form of acquisition. But in some way, they need to see a path to exit for them to even put the money in it. It's just to say, if you actually go into a restaurant, but they shut the door behind you, you can't get out, or you can't get in the first place, right? So there's a lot around that I think is people that really force the investors when they first look at any opportunity to begin. I'll leave some to
I mean, I'm generally on the other side of the table, raising funds from VCs and whatnot. There's also a lot of red flags to look out for in potential VCs in terms of how creative are they. Generally, when you raise money from anyone, you're effectively starting a marriage. It's a 10-year plus journey, right? Don't jump into that with just anyone, right? Don't fall in love with the people that you do see at that VC at that point in time, because they might not be the same people that are there in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, right? You have to really look at that VC and see what they stand for and what support they could potentially give you to make a decision if you want to accept them, right? We're always talking about like we need to raise money and like we want to get the money, etc. But think of what comes attached with that money, the responsibility in that way, right? And ultimately, the people that you have to interact with. Because if you're doing great, and as a good VC, they'll probably leave you alone, I've noticed. If you're not doing great, you're going to be having weekly calls with them or daily calls with them, asking for status updates, and then effectively micromanaging the organization. And that can be good and it can be bad, right? Depending on the people that have invested in you.
I just want to add one thing. I think a lot of the red flags, and as you said, right, it is a long-term relationship, so it's a lot about trust. And I think from the investor angle, they want to be able to trust you, your product, and your team. But then a lot of the things that I've seen some other founders who do is not very helpful for building that trust. For example, if you're meeting an investor A and you tell them I met investor B, they have committed money to me, and if you tell that to investor A, you can be dead sure that investor A is going to go reach out to investor B and ask, have you actually committed that money? And I know that it sounds weird because I would lie about something like this, but people do that. And that when you do that, it instantly loses the trust because now I need to figure out if anything you say is true. I need to go verify and do my due diligence on everything you say. How do I trust your user numbers or your retention figures? What about your average revenue per user? If I start having to dig into every single statement you make, chances are I'm not going to do that investment, well, because I don't have the time, first of all. But second of all, it's also just, do you want to jump into bed with someone that you can't trust? So I think just over blanket or umbrella statement is, don't do anything that will make you lose trust. And that also applies when it comes to investors, no matter how much you want to get that money out of them.
Very, very good insight. Cool. I also have another question for Joyce. How do VCs assess market potential when they're considering investments in different regions? I think with your portfolio, like over 500 companies, right? I'm sure there's a very global set of companies, right? How do you assess which one to go for? And is there a filtering mechanism or like what do you look at?
So for us, because we invest a lot in Web3 investments, I think most of the time we less focus on the geography because we have seen great startups coming from all parts of the world. And because they build on Web3, a lot of times they are again building globally, they have a global addressable market, and so that does help. That said, I think it's very important to say Web3 or effectively blockchain is a technology. Just like internet is a technology, you can apply it in many different applications. I think we care more about if the potential applications that you are building is particularly thriving in a certain region. So for example, if we're talking about games, I think a lot of times we'll say very broad stroke generalization, right? We'll say, well, if this is a game that will benefit from having a good number of your average gamer has to be wealthy and rich, that'll be, maybe the US games will look better. If I'm like, no, this is a mobile game and I just want more users, right? Then maybe we'll look for Asia. So there is a little bit of, I think, general rule of thumb that you will have in that mind. It doesn't have to be absolute. I think it's a lot of time is with the whole building journey becoming more global. Meaning, while you are sitting here building your startup, your engineers don't have to be sitting in the same place, or your graphic designer doesn't have to be, or the business development person can also be a different geography. I think that is also making it less and less relevant for the investor to look at where that the team is based or where that is coming from. So I think that to that extent, we look at it more from the vertical to the linking that actually does that application, does that use case make sense? Does that actually have a market size based on the vertical itself or the application itself? And where, again, coming back to, do we see that in a good product that will have a good opportunity? I do want to add on one thing before you feel like you're jumping in, I know. The one thing is just that, but it does matter where the legal entity is. Because even though the team setup doesn't matter so much because it can be global, legal entity could be tricky. There are funds that are actually there will be especially US-based funds, they would much rather prefer investing in US-based companies. It's a lot coming down to the legal system that they're familiar with, and that's why they'll put money in that. And which is also why you'll see many companies start something like a Delaware C-Corp company that effectively say, This company does nothing other than holding the equity for investors to pay money and buy the equity. That is not an operating entity. The operating entity is somewhere else. The chief is definitely not in the US. It doesn't matter. But a lot of times it's about the legal setup would also help you sometimes not necessarily attract new investors, but more so like so then they don't want to make anything.
Yeah. Web3, as you said, is a technology, but you can also admit that the industry has definitely funded some products which are not really products to begin with. There's this sort of running trope within Web3 where it's like, okay, I have an idea, I can't get it funded in Web2, so I'll go to Web3. Those retards will give us anyway. And it's a very real phenomenon where people don't really know how to build products. They have never done this before. They just have a great idea, and it sounds good on paper, but they don't know how to execute, they don't know how to make a good product, and then they go raise some money, and because they tack on Web3, or now it's Web3 plus AI, right? Then they get more money raised, right? And that's a very real phenomenon, right? I don't think it's something that you want to pursue as a founder. So like, okay, I'm doing accounting software, but now it's not AI accounting software with Web3 integrations. Great, double the money raised, triple the valuation, right? Like, it's not something that you want to really burden yourself with in that sense, because it also means that you're sort of committing to a path. Like, I have to build in this direction. I have to build for Web3. I have to tack on some AI stuff. And all of that in the early stages will be distraction from you building your core product and your core features. Focus on what you're good at. So like a startup, ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're building the next revolutionary AI technology or if you're building accounting software, the nuts and bolts of building a company are still the same. You're still going to have to do the same type of execution. You still have to start the company, do the development, do the reach out, do the sales, etc. All of that will be the same, whether you're building a revolutionary product. And in that sense, I kind of like boring businesses. Because everyone needs boring businesses.
In terms of growing a product out of your local region, going into a global region, what are like some of the common mistakes that a startup can make when they are trying to adapt into a new market? Like, I see a lot of product startups here. Majority in this audience, I think, are service businesses, but there are also few product companies who are also looking at going into other markets, right? So, in your experience, what are like the common mistakes that you have seen, or the pitfalls that they should be avoiding?
I don't think there's like any one single mistake. That it's a compound effect. It's first understanding the markets that you're looking at. This is doing this through product interviews, or whether this is reaching out to some friends that you have that are living in the country. Like if you're building, for example, a produce product, and this works great in Africa because they don't have great financial infrastructure there. Great, you have a massive product with good revenue. You cannot adopt this for Europe because Europe already has this existing infrastructure, and no one feels that pain point, right? So if you have a product that's solving a problem for someone or providing entertainment in some way, whether it's a game or media app or what have you, trying to understand the markets where this applicable pain point will also be available, right? Like if people are experiencing the same issues in specific countries, then go talk to those people. It is really that easy. Add them on LinkedIn. If you're building a financial related product, an accounting related, add CFOs on LinkedIn and ask them, hey, can I have 20 minutes of your time? I'll give you an Amazon gift card or whatever. People love that gift cards.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I think the thing is to definitely not assume that what you have learned from the current market to be applicable. So I think coming back to it is user testing. And I feel like a lot of times when it comes to user testing, it's also looking at, I think that Amazon gift card is amazing. Because many people are using Amazon. It's very easy for them to turn that into, something that can fix it. But I think back to the point is, there are always going to be barriers around how you can validate the idea. I think it's always helpful to actually get different ideas on what is the thing that you need to test and really lay it out clearly, and then finding out what are the ways that you can test it without putting in lots of money and time into it. Because I think it comes back to the point is, the thing that you assume might not be right. You might need to go to a second test, to a third test. And a lot of times is that you don't want these tests to take months because you might not have that runway to keep on doing these tests. if they keep not coming back to the right result you want. So I think thinking about the faster iteration, ideally lower costs, and then being able to make it fast, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, I think we have to jump into Q&A, but before that, I have a very specific question. It's a two-part question. First of all, can you explain to the audience what's a DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization?
So a decentralized autonomous organization is effectively two things, right? Decentralized and autonomous. It's easy to talk about the decentralized part first. The decentralized part effectively comes into play as in you believe that the governance of this organization does not have to be top-down. It's not determined by a group of executive members, but in fact, all of these approvals or decisions are made through voting. A lot of these times, voting is done through token. Whether it's token in a currency, that you can actually buy and sell in the market, or whether it's done in terms of generally just something you can trade, like a currency you use in game. That doesn't matter. It is a matter of how do people reach decision, and that decision making is decentralized. There are some people that take it one step further and also do decentralized operations. So instead of having a centralized entity that determines whether you can or cannot work for this organization, it's effectively anyone that comes through. There's certain things that maybe you need to test out, and then afterwards you can freely contribute. There's a lot of times where people talk about as a community. And then I think this is a decentralized part. So the autonomous part is a bit tricky. Most DAOs are not autonomous. The reason of that is because it is very hard to do. When we say autonomous, is that all of this decision making is less about the actual day-to-day, because the day-to-day are supposed to be coded up in smart contracts. Meaning that if I'm putting money into this product and then taking that money out, that part is automated. So this is not something that the everyday you need to go and vote whether you do it or not. It's actually coded up. Similar to like many things on, if I promise that I'm going to pay company fee certain amount of money, that is coded up a process. You don't need a centralized entity in the middle to actually make that decision, or potentially say, you all go vote on that, but they don't have do they have the power to override that rule if it comes out to be not favorable to them? So that's a bit of a lot of the downs is, again, coming back to it, could be very decentralized. How did you do on the autonomous side? There will be some, I think, more OG downs that, as in like more older downs that I think might have gone there, but it takes some more smart contract work.
Alright, okay, so this is the interesting part. The reason why I wanted to explain what the DAO is, we are actually going around the idea of converting this fight community into a DAO, right? So as we've started about 10 years ago, as a very small community, it's a place for people to come and sort of meet and then have a chat. But we've evolved into what it is today, and then we feel there's a lot of value that we offer. So the idea is one, for me to stay away from this and have no responsibility whatsoever. And then two, also to give back to the community and figure out a mechanism to, we figure out some ways to raise funds for us, like not through investors, but like various other sponsorship mechanisms or maybe loyalty or whatever, right? So we figure out there's some revenue coming in, right? And we want to figure out a mechanism, how can we identify some startups and then reinvest back into them? Right, so I think the idea is like it's called decentralized startups investing, and I think a startup guy tried to do this like a couple of years back, and then I watched a video on YouTube, and then when they launched it, but when I went to their website, it wasn't working anymore, so I don't know if they around or not, or had a typical startup did or not. But do you have any perspective on that, decentralized startup investment, so that the community people who participate in this, they get some token. And they also get the voting rights to say that, we've shortlisted, like the community shortlist, maybe people can apply, like 100 startups can apply, the community decides what are the 5 startups that's going to get funding that the Spike community has raised.
I think that would be a very interesting idea. I think most of the investment now, there have definitely been a lot of them, especially around 2021-22. Although they might be investing something, some of them invest in startups, some of them invest in NFTs, which might not turn out that well, which just might be why some of them no longer exist as well. But then coming back to this idea itself, I think it is very encouraging. I think it is a way to actually have the community to have that voice, right? To say all of these different startups, you effectively have many judges to give you an opinion whether they believe that will succeed or not. And that's maybe because you are an industry expert, or maybe because you know some friends who live in the market that you say you want to go into. So I think that is actually I see the value of it is because when they actually have the token to go into that vote, because you need to make your voice heard, I think that is actually making a lot of people to actually contribute, right? To actually say, make a judgment, do you believe in this or not? If yes, why? If not, why? I think the tricky part, usually what we see from most of the DAOs is around engagement, like long-term engagement and participation. Because why do they put in this amount of efforts? To actually understand the product, to read through your white paper, it takes time. And so I think it's a lot of time where we see that it's the ongoing engagement mechanism that ultimately will come in play. But I feel like it is something that, especially a tight-knit community like this, can definitely start working towards. The final thing, I think, because it's part of investment, just to make it's a very legal nitty-gritty point, it's also about what is the investment entity. If you're investing into tokens, some of them will accept you as a DAO to invest them into the tokens directly, because that is somewhat of you can see the transaction, maybe sending the money. And ideally, you have your investment portion is put in investing contract that you get the money back when you launch. But if it's in equity, for example, or even sometime right now token as well, it needs a legal agreement. So the question is, who is signing that legal agreement? And how do you actually verify if the legal agreement is signed? I think a lot of that would come into play as you go into an investment now. Usually we see people set up special purpose vehicles for that, and then maybe there are also ways about how do you attest that on chain. Hey, I actually signed this. We actually signed this. We are legal owner of these shares, for example. So I think it's an interesting idea. Just a lot more to build around that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just exploring the idea. Have no proper plan per se. I think the important thing is to continue to build this community, provide value, so that people feel that we provide value. But we also believe there are really good entrepreneurs here who are not being supported by the local investors. I hope there are few here. You can hear me. No, because this has been a constant problem. But at the same time, from an investor's perspective, I think some of the struggles that they also have is the startups haven't shown real growth, right? And I think Chalinda is here. Chalinda can probably address this also during the Q&A. But yeah, we're just going around with the idea at the moment and then see if we can actually do this DAO and then figure out a mechanism to reinvest back into the community. On that note, I'd like to open the Q&A. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Sachin is running around with the mic. In the meantime, I just want to take a minute to say something about the 2-minute speech that we are planning to do later. So the idea is that we will invite 3 startups to come and pitch. We've already shortlisted someone interested, shown the interest to come and pitch. There are opportunities for 2 startups if you want to come and pitch. The feedback, we expect the community to give the feedback, and please be constructive when you give feedback. And we don't expect you to give the feedback on here because otherwise the session is going to drag. So startups will come and pitch, and then please grab a beer and then give them feedback privately, and don't hurt their feelings. Make sure it's constructive so that the founder learns something from that.
Hi man, it's been a minute. Thank you for that. I guess my question, what is the most remarkable ways you've seen people be able to take tangible value and digitize that in the Web3 space? Ideally not from the gaming market, but anything else.
So I think payment is always something that really speaks to me. My family is also in Hong Kong, and then so while I was working in various locations, I do send money home every month. And so effectively it's a lot about how do you do all this cross-border transfer. And I think cross-border transfer is something that for people with very fortunate currency pairing, it could be very low cost because many people do that. But for people who might have currencies that are less commonly used, we'll all feel the pain about you send $1,000, you get 150 taken away just because you need to make that payment. And sometimes it's not very feasible for you to effectively wait until you have a large chunk of money so you can lower that cost. And I think that Web3 components of it, because of the way that it is set up, meaning you can do very low cost transactions, sometimes even at very low value, that you don't also have an intermediary that effectively has a monopoly over that remittance market. So that's why I think it is one use case that we definitely see a lot of positive benefits to people, both the people who are sending money and both people receiving the money, if you got more about it. I think another part of it is also in terms of coming through around how much do we actually have effectively documentation and trust. I think part of the issue around the world is that you don't really know if you can take sometimes what government says, sometimes what the companies or the corporate says. And this is a little bit further out. I think we are talking about on-chain transactions. It tends to be actual money transacting. But going forward, if data can be streamed around, put on chain, and then you can actually see, is that data actually, how is it being used? For example, the data that you're sharing over Facebook or WhatsApp, is that actually, or Telegram, is that actually being used, in the way that you have agreed to? Versus are they actually being used in ways that you don't actually want them to? I think that is also part of that trust building side of it. But of course, right now we don't have that, and I think there's still a lot more work to actually figure out how to do it. And I guess in a certain way, why would Facebook or Twitter or Telegram want to let you do it, right? So I think there's still a lot of questions to answer on that potential application.
I think Farcast is a pretty good example of that as in decentralized social media platform, right? Yeah, Farcast, and then also I thought in Dubai, the land registry is on chain, if I'm not mistaken. In Sri Lanka, we have so much problem at the land registry because people are trying to do like fake deeds or whatever. So I think that's a real good use case, but I don't know when that implementation will come. I guess we'll decide after 21st.
Building as opposed to Web3 and the whole other space with DAOs and all of that. So I'm in a crossroads at the moment with been running a company for around close to 5 years. And I'm in a crossroads where I'm bootstrapped from the beginning. But right now I am asset rich but cash poor. I'm broke all the time. I want to scale like this, but I can't because I'm strapped for funds. I've never explored the venture capital space. I don't care about mutation and I said, doing it. I'm really not sure what to do with my skills slowly. Do I go there? So I really love some insight so I can change the dynamic and switch it up a bit.
Right, if you need more capital to scale up the company, the logical question is like, find an investor. If that's not an option, then I low-key love bootstrapping companies. For me, that is the way I want to do it. Like a company that is bootstrapped, they know the value of the money, right? If you get handed a couple $1 million to like go build your company or something like that, then all of a sudden the dynamic becomes different. You start splurging on stuff and travel and booths at events and blah, blah, blah. That's great. You're a direct-to-consumer product and you're going to a B2B conference and getting booths there. Great spend of your marketing, right? So a lot of those things don't really make a lot of sense. So ultimately, if you already have a product that's running and has been up and running for 5 years that generates revenue, potentially optimizing for that revenue and seeing if there's anything more that you can generate there or costs and efficiencies that you can lower in that sense. If the product is specifically for Sri Lanka in the edtech domain, looking into specific markets outside of Sri Lanka that might have similar problems that you can solve. It's a little bit hard to like give you a definitive answer on this without like more, but come find me after this and we can have a little chat.
So what I want to ask is to be preferable for investors. Some people go and register as an LLC or a C Corp, but then like anyone can actually go and register as a C Corp or an LLC. So does it actually have some kind of weight, like when you are trying to look preferable to international investors? So does it really, like invest from the investor's perspective, does it really seem favorable or like preferable just because you are an LLC or CFO?
As you guys are talking about that deal, that it would go through. Because there will be instances where, let's say, if it is a fund that is being set up and they say, well, the idea is great, the team is amazing, but it is not in a jurisdiction we are comfortable with, that could be a no. Just because of the way that it's set up. And I don't think Delaware is the only construction network. I see many of our portfolio companies also incorporated in Singapore, for example. And so I think there are some of the hotspots. The reason why these jurisdictions are preferred, on one hand, it's because they're based in the same country, they know the laws better. The second part, usually, I think Singapore in particular, is because of the international arbitration courts. So in case of any disputes, there is an arbitration route for that to go through before they have to escalate to a full-blown court case. So I think there are certain legal considerations when it comes to like where the entity they want, where the invested entity they want to be.
Hi. Can you each tell us an example of a startup that you're particularly excited about at the moment and what excites you about them?
I think all the startups that I work with are ones that I'm excited about. They all cover slightly different things. They're all, I don't want to say in the Web3 space, because again, Web3 is just a technology, right? If your user downloads your app and they don't ask you which database you're using or whatever, no, they take the app because they like that specific product, right? Or the entertainment that it gives, etc. So most of the companies that I work with currently are building with Web3 technologies, which also allows a lot of flexibility in how they build their product. And it's all new and exciting to like figure out how you can make a decentralized permissionless organization work in that format or build product around that. Which one am I most excited about? Let's skip all the infrastructure. I think the company that we started here in Sri Lanka is the one I'm most excited about because I get to work with amazing people and I wake up every morning feeling blessed to be working with them. I think the people that you surround yourself with is the most important aspect of anything. So that's what I'm most excited about.
So basically I'm a game dev. So right now I just basically want to do the same thing which you guys do. I'm interested in that, so that's my plan and why I came here too. And the thing is just that, let's say I have a game with me. Ask me your opinion that I should focus on the traction initially or the investor. That's what I'm talking about.
It's not really just one way or the other. I think that's the first thing is and then I think that's what makes being a startup founder so difficult is that you have to multitask all the time and you have to build relationship all across the board with your users, your partners, your investors, or potential investors. So I think there is always going to be things that you go simultaneously. So, but more tactically, I think when it comes down to reaching out to investors, I think one thing to note is when you actually need the money raised, that shouldn't be the first time you speak with that investor. So your networking starts way earlier. It's really going into understanding, hey, does this investor actually invest right now, or maybe they're out of money? Or do they actually invest in the things that I build, or are they investing in the early stage that I'm building? I think a lot of that conversation ideally take place before you actually need the money, because that would actually help you do two things. One thing, yes, you build a relationship. But two, you also get the inputs, and from those conversations, you better understand what will make them tick, what will make them actually say yes. And three, yes, it also gives you more time to build up that traction, because then you know where that goalpost is, so that you can start shooting for it. So I don't think there is an either-or question. I think you have to do all of them, which just sounds like a really terrible thing to say. But I do think that there's one advice I would say: definitely start doing all of them. Don't wait until you need money to start networking with potential investors, and definitely use those early conversations before you need the money to get the inputs, understand where the bar is for them to say yes, and then continue to iterate with your product team or your designer, your developer, and all them to actually work towards that part, or marketer as well.
Unless you're a former co-founder of OpenAI, you talk to investors and first raise $1 billion and then start thinking about building a product, right? Okay. I think it also changes. Like I think if you are a second-time entrepreneur or third-time entrepreneur, then it's a lot more easier, right? I think raising funds, because if you had a successful exit, then you probably speak to the investors first, because get the money, I can set up the team, all that, and then you start building the product. I guess, yeah, it depends on the entrepreneur as well and which stage they are in.
So in a market like Sri Lanka, right, there's a lot of digitization yet to happen as well, right? Even in the land registry or in anywhere, government is not digitized. Nowhere is digitized, almost everywhere. And even there could be a lot of problems that we can solve by just digitizing as well, even without talking about Web3. What do you think? Like, should we start by digitizing, or should we get into Web3 and solve the problems with involving Web3 as well? And also, what do you have for startups, like say, who are let's say, has done the digital transformation with the product and doesn't have Web3 involved in it, but later on to their own product, maybe they can get the same use case done via Web3. Do you see that happening, or do you see that space for that? Actually, there's two questions.
So on the topic of digitization, I don't think it's an and or either or question. It's a technology choice, right? If all the participants in an ecosystem can agree that, hey, you're in charge of all of this, and you can run your centralized server, your database, your cloud infrastructure, whatever, to do all of this, great, then why do you need Web3? You already have a trusted person that's doing that for you. If you're thinking about, let's take the land registry example, right? We're talking about a lot of different, data points and a lot of different people that are involved. There's a couple of technologies that you have to employ, right? If you would go the Web 2 route, you would say, great, you can use your Google logon or your Apple ID or what have you to log in and then upload your information and get it certified, etc. But on the other side of the equation, if you do it in a decentralized format, then you don't need to have any trust in anyone else. You could even set it up where you say, I upload the information for my registry, and then I ask my neighbors if they agree with this. And they can just sign off on it. And if everyone signed off on it that touches your property, then that's the information that's there, and that's immutable in chain at that point, right? So there's not really an and or, it's more of a preference in terms of implementation, what you can achieve with that.
I guess it doesn't really matter whether it's Web3 or not, but what's the most suitable technology to address a pain point, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Good evening. My question is for Joyce. And for companies based in countries with economic challenges like Sri Lanka, what are the best approaches to attract foreign investors?
I think ultimately from the investor's perspective, so there are two sides of it. I think first of all, let's talk about getting to know the investors. And then the second part is about, can you close the deal, right? So on the first side, I think when it comes to, if you could actually reach out to the investors, considering that, say in Web3, it's not an industry, but it's a space, and there's a lot of confidence, and it takes a lot of resources to keep going around to meet investors in person. That of course is a nice to have, right? But then not everyone with that time, that efforts that you can really put into that. And so I think in those scenarios, rely a lot of potential warm introductions that could be helpful. And that warm introduction doesn't come through as I met this. It could be say through some of your existing investors if you have them locally, or maybe the angel investors that also happen to know some that may have their own company that they also have further investors going in. It's usually a lot about that networking. The second part, I think it's also reaching out through LinkedIn. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but it's really not. I think if you have a really good pitch, I think that's actually still a way that people do actually take inbound potentially on LinkedIn. So this is not as easy to do because you probably get a lot of people ignoring your comments. It does not feel great to be ignored. But I think that is also another approach. I think the third part of that is actually coming through on depending whether your startup also have other partners. Sometimes looking at who are the investors of those partners could be helpful too. But now we're talking about is a lot of people that can help you get to those investors. So why should that investor say yes, right? So I think in that case, there's a lot around. You need to actually say, I think there are two sides of things. Investors don't like finding out something they didn't know early on and only discover that during the due diligence process. So if there is certain issue that we see, and potentially because the company is currently incorporated in Sri Lanka, but if you say, well, I am aware of that problem and I am going to do something about it, so that would actually make it easier for you as an investor, I think most investors would appreciate that. So I think a lot of it is you have to basically say, yes, don't tell them this is the first thing. Tell them what your product is, who you are, the traction that you already get, and then why that might be a good fit in the portfolio, if you have research about them already. But address those concerns head on. I think those would actually leave a much better impression to the investors than actually dragging on the due diligence process and only later on they discover there is something that they're not comfortable with. And they might not be comfortable with just, of course, the economic difficulty that we are describing, but another thing is if you don't tell them that upfront, they might also become less trusting to you as an entrepreneur because they don't know what else you're not telling them. So it's coming back to the trust point as well.
Thank you. Maybe a little note on asking for intros in that sense, because For me personally, getting warm intros to new VCs or new investors is always the best way to go to build that relationship, to start that relationship. Do the work. Like, do the research on like, hey, I want to talk to Animonca Brands. Okay, great. What is your product? Who within Animonca Brands would be most applicable to talk to about your product, right? Be specific. Do the work for the person that you're asking that intro from, right? You don't want to be like, hey, I need to talk to these guys. Great, so then the person that you're asking this from is expected to do the research for you, find out who that person is, write a blurb for your company and make a pitch deck for you. No, that's your job, right? So do a lot of that work, make it as easy for the person that you're asking for that intro, so they can basically just like copy paste that and send it to the right person.
Yep, do the homework and make their life easier, right?
We are to valuable compare. So there are different ways that we can add a multiplier for revenue ones, we can do price ratios of sort of that. So what I want to ask is, what sort of strategy that we would follow if we are to valuable compare and ask you to, so I'm into a tech business.
I think in more mature businesses, you can typically look at a lot of multiples or comps that really just tell you where the stock market, what the stock price is supposed to be. In a startup, it's very ambiguous because, well, first of all, the investor doesn't even know your user number. If I want to create a metric out of that, it's usually already on a later stage. I would say it depends on which stage of investment you're asking for. If you're raising it approximately, I would say around B+, then you typically start seeing people throwing in price earning or price revenue ratio into their consideration. Maybe some people only invest if it's less than, it's like somewhere between 10 to 20 times price to, or the valuation to revenue, annual forecasted revenue ratio, right? So there are many ways that I think they would cope depending on what they care about. So, but then for the early stage investment, it typically come down to less about those particular valuation metrics. It comes down to what are the other competitors in the market are raising. If they say, well, I am building something similar to something that has just raised in the last 6 months, I think that's usually that, honestly, they'll just look at those valuation and think, oh, maybe they should probably work the same. Because you really don't know about this company all that much. And chances are you're also still on a very high growth journey. And there might be ways that, so I think benchmarking, that's effectively what people do. It's just what are similar companies in the last 6 months, let's benchmark them. Of course, that also introduces another part about geography. So a lot of times Silicon Valley startups do command a higher valuation because the comparison they're drawing is with other Silicon Valley startups. And most likely because the cost base is also very high as well to hire people from a team there. I would say there is usually a discount, I think, further away here from Silicon Valley, in a way, maybe barring a few different exceptions. So I think that's one point. But the second part, I think, about creating, given all that information, that benchmarks might not be something you can change. So what you can do differently, I think, around doing, creating a better story to actually get a better valuation, I'm going to leave it to the serial entrepreneur to answer that.
Creating a better story. Well, I've seen pitch decks where the founders literally put on the deck, we make a product that is used by people. There are 8 billion people on the planet, so a lot of people will use our product. That's not market sizing us, right? So you have to be a little bit realistic about what you think you can conquer through the standard SAM, PAM, SOM, these type of calculations that you can do with like what can you actually achieve in the short term. But still with that, it's still a multiple of that. You ultimately, what I generally do is I calculate the amount of capital I need to get to a certain stage, and then add 50 or 100% on top, effectively double that amount, and then say I want to give 10 to 20% of my equity for this, and then you effectively have your valuation. So if I need 3 million to get to the next 2.5 years, then I add some on top. I say it's 5 million, and then my valuation will be between 25 to 30 mil or something like that. Right? So those are generally like with a tech-focused product, and this doesn't really apply outside of tech companies. That's generally the approach that people take.
Awesome. Did you say one more question? Or no questions. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Joyce and Lee, for this really insightful session. I think a lot of questions, and I'm sure people will come and talk to you after this as well during networking, sharing their time and their knowledge. Thank you so much.
So we're going to invite first Dilinda from justenglish.lk to come and take. Round of applause for Dilinda, guys. today, I'm the founder of Distinguished.lk. It's an anonymous space to help working professionals improve their English within 6 weeks. Technically, the problem that we're trying to solve is that we've seen a lot of working professionals in Sri Lanka finding it difficult to converse in English. Say, for example, you were a senior executive at a company and you're trying to get to the next level in your career, maybe a promotion or you're trying to fly abroad. But the problem is that you have pretty bad English speaking skills. What solutions do you have? Maybe head to an English course, program, or an online program that's out there. But think of the embarrassment that you'd have to go through. You being an executive, having to go into a class of a bunch of teenagers and introduce yourself. So that's exactly why we built Just English, where all participants are anonymous and then it's entirely focused on conversational practice. And our offer is you improve your English within 6 weeks or you get your money back. And I'm building this journey in public, sharing revenue, numbers, and the entire journey on the internet. So if you are interested in checking it out, check out justenglish.lk or elina.xyz. Having said that, I'd like to thank Gayantha and Evan for the opportunity.
Hi guys, I'm Hashma Inisa. We are surname I know. It was a mistake by the grammar editor. My parents didn't name me Inisa, right? So keep this name in mind because I'm building a brand behind my surname. So basically what I do is I'm an academic enthusiast, material scientist myself. I'm building an edtech company with a recruitment arm, right? So I have students ace particular exams without the need for tutoring. You can pass exams like CIMA, medical licensing exams, GCSEs, A-levels with no need for tutoring, spending hundreds of dollars an hour. If you go to our platform and buy all of the past papers, notes, mock tests and everything and go through the streamlined process, you can pass our exams. We have around 10,000 students in our platform with around 2,500 who just passed out, and we are trying to convert that pipeline into recruitment as well. So right now we help, in terms of recruitment, we help scaling tech companies. Mind you, scaling tech companies expand their talent and hire globally, but also remotely, right? There's a lot of talent in Sri Lanka where they are not given the platform to actually showcase their talent globally. By facilitating such a platform, we hope to bridge that gap between amazing talent and also amazing employers, right? So that's me. So any of you guys,
Right.
So yeah, thank you so much guys, and I'm Hashma by the way. We are surnames, thanks.
Hi guys, my name is Darshan and I'm from a company in Oregon, right? So you're probably wondering what we do, right? Yeah. We automate the procurement process for hotels and suppliers in order for them to collaborate better, right? And when you compare it to other companies, right? We offer a pricing model at $100 in which hotels can purchase this, right? Meanwhile, for suppliers, it's completely free, right? Apart from that, suppliers can market their products on this platform for an additional $10 per product, right? And the problems we solve is order processing, right? And the time-consuming communication. So we do have a list of clients we listed for the platform, right? In which is hotels and suppliers. We also recently onboarded some suppliers, so Colombo Coffee Company for our business. Apart from that, we are trying to mainly focus on small to medium-sized hotels. Mainly we are focusing locally because we're trying to penetrate the market here rather than aim globally, but we do have plans to aim globally. Traction, so at the moment it's in its pre-seed stage, right? But for now we are still doing development of the platform. Awesome.
So to wrap up, I had to do the vote of thanks. So I will be thanking Leeroy and Joyce for that really nice insights given to us on Web3 space, on building our startups, getting investment and whatnot, and also accepting like all of our questions without any hesitance and answering all of them. And for our value partner who has been with us all this time, Barefoot, for all their support given to us, even at the toughest time. And Huawei for sponsoring us behind the bar today. And yes, and the community. So thank you guys for sticking with us all this time. And thank you for bringing your friends. We always see new faces coming up. So that's really interesting for us to have people coming for what we are doing here and for what Gayantha has been doing for a long time. So we really appreciate it. Please bring more people as well and spread this word. We are trying to do a good thing for startups and for Sri Lanka. So with that, we'll wrap up.